In the first video, I showed you how to create a 3D brick in Maya and import it into Unity so that it has bump mapping from a normal map as well as bevels that are coming in from the normal map. And so we want to continue this in this video, and I'm going to show you how to do a door that is going to have an animation to open it, similar to the class exercises we've been doing with the 3X Game Development Essentials by Will Goldstone. We have been adapting some of those older scripts to a new scene, and in this case I'm going to take the scripts that we have for opening a door and apply it to a door animation that I bring in from Maya. So let's start that now. So first, to begin with, let's go over to Maya, and I want to create a door. So we created a cube, and we saw how the UV layout was for that cube. We're going to now create a door. So I'll go ahead and delete this cube. And I don't need the source cube or brick source or brick target, but I will leave the lights in there. And we'll create another cube. So we're going to create a new cube, and this time we're going to shape it in the shape of a door. So I want to go to my channel box or go to my tools on the left, and let's hit the W key, or sorry, the R key, and scale it so that we have something that is probably, I don't know, 0.3 is probably a good thickness for our door. This is going to be kind of like a heavy metal door, so maybe it's a little thicker than most doors. And then I'm going to give it, I'm going to scale it in X a little bit, and let's maybe make that 2. And then I want to scale it up a certain amount to the shape of a door. And you can eyeball that. You can look, I've got a scaling in Y of 3.996, so I'll just round that off to 4. So we've got a 2 foot wide, 4 foot tall, and 0.3. And again, that's not feet actually. That's just 2 grid units inside of Maya. So if we look at our grid on the bottom here, there's two grid units for the width of this door. And if we want a little bit taller, maybe that's not a very tall door. Let's go with 5 and see what that looks like. That's a pretty tall door. Maybe a little bit too tall. Let's do more like, let's go back. Let's do halfway in, 4.5. And that'll be our door. So we have our door shape, and we want to texture map it, and then we want to animate it. So first, let's name this. We'll call it door. And then what I want to do is we want to look at the UV mapping, and we want to actually make sure the UV mapping is going to come out correctly for this door. So what I mean by that is the cube that we started with had a cube mapping in the UV editor, and this one actually still has a cube mapping. If I switch over to the UV editing, workspace, you'll see that it still has that cube mapping where every side has an equal amount of space. But that's not the shape of our door. The door has a much bigger surface on the front of the door and on the back of the door, and the sides are very small and tall. And so the shapes are not even remotely close to what this door actually is in its shape. So in order for Maya to recognize the shape of this, we need to like set it permanently in place. And when you're working with Maya, you're building up these different nodes that show up in the attribute editor as tabs, and they're creation nodes that kind of remember the shape of the original cube that this was made out of. And so to sort of finalize it into this exact shape, I need to do an edit delete by type history that will get rid of all of that original construction history. And I also need to do a modify freeze transformations. And that's actually going to set it so that this is the default shape of the door, as if I made this object in this shape originally. And if you open up the options for this, you'll see that it does have an option for joint orient, and that's the only time that you'd want to open up the options for this, because by default translate, rotate, and scale are turned on. And so I'm freezing all of those transforms. And when you're freezing transforms, what you're actually doing, if you switch back to the Maya Classic and look in your channel box here, what you're going to see is that your scaling has numbers in it from what I set originally for the shape of the door. And its original scaling was for a cube. And if I actually put 1, 1, 1 back in here, it would be a cube again. So to make it permanently set in this shape, you freeze it, and it will set the scaling back to 1, 1, 1, but it will retain the shape of this door. So if I freeze it, you'll see that now it says 1, 1, 1 in scaling, but the door still has the shape of a door and not a cube. So what it's saying is that this is the original shape of this object, and the transforms are back to their original setting. So that's an important thing to understand, because it looks at the shape of the object in relation to the transforms when you're going to create the UVs of this object. And so if I want to go into the UV image editor and set the UVs by clicking the face symbol at the top of my UV toolkit and clicking all, so I have all my faces selected, and then I can go down in the tools of this toolkit and find where it says create and open it up. So all of these are collapsed. You got to click on the arrows and open it up. And if I use an automatic, that's the one you want to use first. Generally always, unless you absolutely know what kind of object it is and that there's a particular UV setting that works best for that kind of object, like a cylinder, for instance, you're going to use automatic. And the automatic should give me UVs that recognize the importance of each of these faces. So if I use that and I look at it, I can see that it gave me some UVs that have the front and back of this door as large and the sides as small and thin. And so that's important because those have a certain amount of texture space. You only have 1 by 1 texture space for any object. And how much of that space a particular face takes is going to make it look better. It's going to make it look more clear because it's a bigger amount of space. So it's more pixels. And so in this 2D texture space, whatever is largest is going to be the most important parts of your model that are going to be seen the most. And the front and the back of this door are the most important parts. You don't really scrutinize or look at the edges of the door. So those are less important, so they should be smaller. And they are smaller also in your 3D world. So just understand that does make a difference how big these are. And you can hover over them and see which one is the front of the door and which one is the back of the door. So I consider the front to be the positive Z axis on my models because in my world space inside of Maya, positive Z is coming towards me. So I usually work with looking at a model from the positive Z axis in the world space. And that means X is always going to my right and Y is going upwards. So if I hover over this and it highlights which face it is, I can see that this left face here is actually the front of the door. And this other one is then the back of the door. And we can hover over each one to see which side it is, or whether it's the top or the bottom. So the other thing you might want to do is go to the bottom where it says Arrange and Layout and open that up. And with them all selected, you can hit Layout. And Layout will take what it's sort of already created with automatic, and it will fill it up, because sometimes it doesn't fill it up. It actually filled it up pretty well this time, so I probably don't even need to use this. If I click it, it made them a little bit bigger, but it didn't do much. The only thing that I can say is that I have this empty space up here at the top, and I do have a couple of edges that I could probably copy up to there. But if I copied them up to there or move them up to there, I would need to rotate them. So I'd have to go under the transform area and open that up. And then you can actually move your UVs around. And I'm going to shift select these two faces here, and I'm going to rotate them 90 degrees. So you can see rotate is set to 90 by automatic. I can go counterclockwise or clockwise. I'm going to go counterclockwise, and then I'm going to hit W. All your tools are the same in here for your moving and rotating and stuff like that. So I'm going to just move it and place it up here. And then what I'm going to do is select everything again. So you could just left mouse button drag a selection box over all the faces, and then go to the bottom and hit layout again. And you'll see that it scaled them up a little bit more so that it could fit everything into those, into that 1 by 1 texture space. So it's using up that entire space. And I could scale these edges down a little bit if I wanted to, because if they don't, sometimes they're just really not important and I don't want them to take up the space. What you don't want to do is you don't want to overlap any of these, because they should have their own texture space. Even if they have the same texture map on them, they should have their own texture space, because it is going to make a difference when you bake out your normal maps. So I'm going to go ahead and go with this. And what I need to do is I want to use this. The reason I did this first before I even put a texture map on this door is because I want to use this to go ahead and do the texture mapping. So I need to fit the texture map onto these UV pieces rather than the opposite. So I'm going to go ahead and save this out by going to image at the top. So make sure you have everything selected. If you want to, you could go up and hit all again. So it's all selected. And then go to image and go to UV snapshot. And UV snapshot is going to allow me to save this out as an image file that I can open inside of Photoshop to use as a guide for laying out my texture maps. So I'm going to browse to where I want to save this to. I'm going to just save it to my source images, and I'll call it door UVs. And if you already have one in there, I actually do. I'm going to call it door UVs 2. So we'll do that. And I'll hit save. And it records where that's going to go. I'm going to use a PNG format, and what that's going to do is give me a transparent background on it. PNG. I'm going to save it out as a 2048 by 2048 map. So that's a good size for this door. And then I want to choose an edge color. If it's not black, I would choose black because it's actually the transparent part of the PNG is going to end up being white inside of Photoshop, and black will show you where your edges are. So I usually use black. You could switch this if you want a higher res texture map to 4096, but use increments of that. 1024, 2048, 4096. Those are the increments that you use usually for texture maps. And then the rest of it's default. Go ahead and apply and close. Then I'm going to go out and find my source images folder. I'm going to go from my textures here. I need to find my Maya project, which is going to be for the game assets. And I want to find my source images folder where my texture maps are. And I'm going to look for that door UVs 2. So here it is, door UVs 2. Let's right click it and open it with Photoshop. And this is what it looks like. And if you look at it, you can see that it's got some little black lines there that are hard to see against the transparent checkerboard pattern. So usually what I do with this is I just flatten it, and that way it just goes plain white, and it's much easier to see those edges. And I'll go ahead and fit it on screen. And I know where the front door is and the back door is. If I need to know where the top and stuff is, I can go back into Maya and look at that. But I'm going to put the same kind of texture map on all the edges, so it doesn't really matter. I just want to make sure I know where the front and back are. And then I need to get a texture map. So you saw that I had some texture maps, and I'm going to use this old iron door here texture and fit it into the shape that I had. We've been using free textures from like Wild Textures and places like that, and you can look around and find free textures on the internet, or you can take the shots yourself like I did in previous videos for the terrain textures. But I'm going to use this old iron door, and I'm going to go ahead and copy it. Now, before I actually paste it into there where I'll have layers, I might want to go in and go to something like Image Adjustments, Shadows, Highlights, and remove some of those strong shadows from the door. I don't really need those. It would be better for me to have a more even lighting across the door. There's a little bit of dark across the top, and that's fine. But I would like to have not very many shadows on there. And this shadows highlights, when you pull the amount up, will actually reduce the shadows under shadows. And then on highlights, you can also adjust that. And it just sort of evens out all the lighting. You can increase the color intensity a little bit in the midtones overall. And you can see that it's changes it a bit, but it would produce a better color map, which is what I want right now. And then you can go check things like your levels and see if you need to brighten it or darken it if it seems too dark. But I think that's pretty good. I just added a little bit. This is going to increase the contrast a little bit on the door. So once I make some adjustments, if you want to, you could also adjust some saturation on it. I'll go ahead and copy it. And I want to bring it over into the door UVs. And I want to paste it into the front of the door. So I'm going to go ahead and select that and do an edit. So I use the magic wand tool to select this region. So you can select whatever region you want. And then I'm going to paste into that region with a mask by going Edit, Paste Special, and Paste Into. And it's going to just force that texture map that I copied into that space and put a mask around it. So I can very easily go to Edit Free Transform and adjust that, and it's not going to go outside of that area. And probably what I want to do here is just maybe scale this one so that it's a little bit closer to the shape of the door that I made, which is going to distort it a little bit, but not that much. It's not that far off. So the one that I made is a little wider. I could go adjust that door, but I think I'll just make this door a little wider too. So I'm going to hold Shift down, and I'm just going to pull this out till it hits the edge. And you can see it's staying, the door lock here is still staying pretty round. It's not distorting it that much. There's a little bit of gray on the edge there that I might want to get rid of, that I don't think looks too good. Now you can see it's snapping. I may need to turn off under View my snap so that I can just tweak that little edge there without it snapping to the side of my image. So I think that looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and apply that and click anywhere, or click the little check symbol at the top. Either way. If you've done some scaling and things on it, you might want to try sharpening a little bit. I usually use the Smart Sharpen. I don't think you would want a lot of it, but sometimes when you scale it, it blurs it a little bit as it reinterpolates the pixels. I think I might also go in and increase the hue saturation on it, but I won't do that yet. So that gets the front of the door, and if I want the side of the door or the back of the door, I can do the same thing. I could just select it, make sure you're on that layer, select it, edit, paste special, and paste into, and adjust it. Now that might not be the best idea. I'm going to undo that because actually the door I made here, I want it to be the same just on the other side. So it might be a better idea, since these two sides are actually the same, to duplicate the one that I already scaled. So we could do that. I'm just going to deselect what I have here, and let's go ahead and select this other one. We'll copy it. We'll go back and select that section, and I'll paste into it. And you can see it fits it exactly the same. Now the only difference is I want to make sure you select the color part, not the mask. And I may want to go and do an edit free transform or transform and flip it horizontally. So now, because if this is on the opposite side and I wanted these locks to be in the same place, then likely it needs to be flipped. So to make that fit correctly. All right, so with those two done, I need to do the edges, and I'd probably maybe do the edges by just selecting maybe a section of this door, right, like this part right here, and copying it. Make sure that you're on the correct level, and then go in and paste it in for these other sections. And I could go in and select it and paste into and make a mask and all that. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to do an edit paste, and it's actually under those other two because I had the bottom layer selected when I pasted it. And then I could just do a free transform, because again, these are just edges, and so people don't really look at them that closely. They just need to somewhat look correct. So I'm going to hold Shift down, and I'm just going to stretch it out so it fits over both these pieces at the same time, like that. And then I'll do the same thing for the ones in the side, or the top here, the top and bottom. I'll paste in. I did a Control V, and I'm going to do an edit free transform, and let's just rotate this like 90 or -90. So I'm typing in the stuff at the top here, and then we'll just put it at the top and hold Shift down and stretch it out over both of those pieces. Now I'm not worried about it overlapping into the other pieces, because the door pieces are above this in my layers. So if the door pieces are above it, then when I bring the door pieces back, they're actually going to be sitting on top of that, so everything will be correct, and I'll just have that texture map kind of going on top of all of those. And I might want to go in and pick a color out of this door, maybe the brown, one of the brown rust colors, or a dark color, and go to that bottom layer and add an empty layer, a new layer above it, and just get my paint bucket tool and drop that color into that layer. So what that's going to do is that's just going to fill up that entire layer beneath these, so that if there were any holes or I missed anything between the UV pieces, white won't be showing through from that bottom UV map layer. So it'll just be sort of a color from the door showing through, and it won't be very noticeable. So once you have all of those pieces there, I can go ahead and flatten this and save it back. as a UV map. So I'll go ahead and do that. Let's just flatten the whole image. And if you need to work on it more, you can save it with your layers in there. You could do a file, save as a PSD, and just call it door, or I'll call mine door 2 color map, and save it as a Photoshop file. And that's really just if you think you might work on it some more. And then I'll go ahead and flatten the whole thing. And here's where, if I wanted to adjust the hue saturation and make it a little more saturated, I could. But I don't think I'm going to do that for right now. I'll just leave it the way it is in its default saturation. And we'll go ahead and save that out. So if I save this out, I'm going to do a file, save as, and I'm going to make sure that it's a JPEG, and I want to save it into my source images folder so I can use it inside of Maya, and I'll call this door2 underscore color. So the name underscore and whatever kind of map it is. In this case, it's a color map. And I'll save that. And then I'll look at the what's coming out of that. It's a 4.5 megabyte file. Now, if I'm going to bake it inside of Maya, like if I'm going to bake the diffuse map inside of Maya and not use this one, then I'll go ahead and leave it at full maximum quality because I'm only going to be using this in Maya. If I thought I was going to bring this into Unity, I'd probably pull the quality down on it. But let's do that. Let's bake out the color map inside of Maya. So I'll go ahead and say OK to this. And then we can go back inside of Maya, and we can assign the texture map to the door. So let's do that. We'll go ahead and right-click the door over in my 3D view and go back to object mode. You want to be in object mode when you assign a texture map to an object. And then I will go and right-click that door and go to assign favorite material, and I'm going to do a blend. And this is just like we did last time with the cube. I could give this a name for the texture map, but it's temporary because I'm going to just send this over to Unity, so I usually don't name these textures. And then I'll go ahead and go into the color channel in the far right where you have the checkerboard pattern, and we want to go find, click on it, choose File, and find the image we just made. And it should be right there because it opens to source images, and that's where we save the file. So here's door2 color. That's the one we made. And I'll open it up. And I can see it come up on the door immediately. And if I zoom in on it, we can orbit around and see what it looks like. It looks shiny because we haven't put any bump mapping on it. But it does look like the color map is placed in all the right places and looks pretty good. Now I do notice that some things like here, if I'm looking at this, that looks correct for the front of the door. So I noticed that this lock object is kind of on the second panel from the left. It's in the middle panel, but it's towards the right here. And if I go around to the other side, I actually see that's not looking correct. It's not looking in the same place on both sides. So I flipped it around inside of Photoshop, and maybe because of the way the mapping, it didn't really need to be flipped around. I also notice, actually, now that I look at it, there's this little gray part here on the bottom, and that's actually on the top, and so is the large amount of rust. So it's actually flipped upside down. So it needs to actually be flipped 180 degrees. Not just vertically, but 180 degrees rotated around. And so we could do that inside of the inside of Photoshop, or we could do that inside of Maya, inside of the UV texture mapping. I think that probably let's do it inside of Photoshop. So we'll just go back into Photoshop, and here's where it was a good idea to actually save out the Photoshop with the layers so I can get it back. In this case, I haven't closed this file yet, so I can just hit Control Z and undo the flattening, and then go find the layer, which is the one for the back, which is this one right here, layer 2. And what I want to do is rotate that around 180 degrees. So I'm going to go into transform, and we'll go into rotate, and I'm going to rotate that around 180 degrees by typing it in. So let's go ahead and do that. Here we've got so at the top we have these different tools, and if I move this one, you can see that's the rotation one. So we want to rotate that around. I'll go ahead and undo that. Try to undo that. Okay, didn't undo, but it doesn't matter. I want to rotate that around 180. Okay, so what that's doing is it's flipping it around. So now the top is at the bottom of this map, and also flipped around that. I think that's the way it's supposed to be. So I'll go ahead and try that. We'll go ahead and flatten it again. So go ahead and apply it. And then I want to go ahead and flatten it. I'll do a file. We'll go ahead and save it. It'll save over the old map, the old JPEG. And let's just take a look at that. So if I go back out, look at my source images, I should see it flipped on that source image. So it did take, and it does look like it flipped. And then we'll go back into Maya. And you can hit reload, and it should update. Yeah, it did. So now if I orbit around, you'll see that now the green on the back of the door is at the top, and we've got the lock in the same place. So we know that's correct. Also, there's some other things like some white paint on here that's on both sides. So, of course, if you were doing this door carefully, you might not want the same map on both sides of your door. You might want a different map on the inside of the door than on the outside of the door. But we're just doing this quickly, so we're going to use the same map. And I could go in Photoshop and paint on that to get rid of some obvious things that are the same. We could do some cloning. We could paint out the white paint on one of the door and put it in another place. But I'm not going to bother to do that right now. Okay, so we have our door map looking good. Now we need a bump map for that. So I'm going to go ahead and do that next. So to create the normal map for our door, we want to go in and create a bump map for our bump map channel. And we'll do that inside of Photoshop like we did before. And I guess to begin with, what I want to do is I'm going to make this rust color come out a little bit more than the green paint, because rust tends to be a little bit on top of paint. So I'll go ahead and duplicate this layer, and we'll start working on making the rust color lighter than the green. So if I go to a select by color range, we can click on the rust, and we can hold our shift key down and click in a couple of places to kind of try to isolate that rust. We can of course use our fuzziness channel here to get some of that rust color. And then we'll go ahead and say OK to that and do an image adjustments, and we'll go ahead and bring that up in lightness. And we can invert that and bring the lightness down. So now we're starting to make the green darker and the rust lighter. And then there are some things here that I would like to pull out as far as little ridges on this. So just looking at the doors themselves, not at the edges, I would like to pull out some of these ridges that come across the middle here. So we could pull out some guides. If you don't have your rulers turned on, you'll need to turn them on so that you can click with your left mouse button in there and pull out some guides. And I'd like to just create some horizontal guides that will allow me to raise the lightness on these areas more than any of the other areas. So starting at about maybe right here and going over to here. So you know, we can section this off and make it so that we're going to have these areas that are going to be raised. And we'll try to make that easy by just making this entire section right here. And I can hold my shift key down and click again. Make sure you have snap turned on so that it's going to snap to these guides, and then I'll click and I'll drag. I'll let go and drag. It'll snap right to those guides and allow me to add to that selection. So then I can just go in and adjust that area up more than the other areas. It's just going to make it a little lighter. And then we can do the same sort of thing for some of these vertical areas. So there's some vertical lines there. We'll go ahead and put a couple of these in here and try to pull those up a little bit. Now I'm not doing this really carefully, but if you were trying to do something important with this that you wanted to have it accurate, you'd want to do it a little bit more carefully than I'm doing it. But we'll go ahead and drag some vertical bars there, and we'll just hold shift down again, snap to it. And I don't know if this is absolutely accurate for this, but it will. We want to see what this effect will be when we make this bumpy. So we'll pull those up a little bit too. And then there is some circular areas. I can switch to my elliptical marquee tool, and I'll turn my extras off so I don't see those guides anymore. And I just want to make these little circular lock things. I want to place something in there for that. And then just go to my paintbrush tool, pick up a light color, maybe lighter than any of the other colors, and then go ahead and paint that into it. And we'll do the same thing on the other one. So to finish up this map, I want to make it into a bump map. And I noticed that I did miss something here. So let's just go ahead and select this little area. And we'll go ahead and lighten that up as well. So all I care about is that it's going to be light enough to pop that area out. And you can go in and you could do an adjustment, levels or brightness, contrast, and contrast that up a little bit so that those really pop out well. And then you might want to switch your mode to grayscale so you can don't flatten it, but discard the color information so you can see if that's really noticeable and popping out. And I think it is. So we'll go ahead and try it. It's not perfect. There's areas that we missed in some of these places, but let's see if we see some of this lattice work on here and some of the difference between the green paint and the rust. So I want to go into my filter 3D area. Make sure that this 3D layers actually is set on something like mesh from preset. Some of those settings will prevent it from working. But I'm going to go to 3D generate bump map, and what I want to see is it come up and be able to actually see those ridges and lines that I just made on the surface. So I can see the areas where the rust is. I can see the areas that are coming out even further where the ridges are that I created, the raised areas, as well as that circular lock area. And we can move these up and down, of course, to emphasize these raised areas without going too far into the nitty-gritty detail. We want some of that detail, but we don't want it to be too distracting. And so that looks pretty good. Let's say okay to that. This is what it ends up looking like. We'll go ahead and do a save as, and we'll switch to JPEG. And I want to save this as door2_bump. And we'll save it. And this is for Maya, so we'll keep it as high a quality as possible, maximum quality, and go ahead and save that out. Now back inside of Maya, I want to put this on my bump mapping channel in my attribute editor for the material that I have on this. I've got the color channel already plugged in. Let's go into the bump channel and choose File. It's going to take me to the bump value, but I want to go to the File tab and click on the file and choose the bump map that I just created, and I immediately see it pop out and give me some of that lattice work that I put in there. Okay, so that looks pretty good. If I orbit around, I can see that it's on both sides and it's popping out those different areas and making it look like it has a little bit of depth on it. So since that looks pretty good, I'll go ahead and use it. I could go back and adjust the amount of bump, but I think that's a pretty good amount right there, so I'm going to go ahead and leave that. So it looks like a metal door, which is what I wanted. Now to send this over to Unity, I'm going to wait until I actually put some animation on this door. So we're done with the UV editing. I'm going to go back to Maya Classic, and I want to go in and create an animation with this door. I am going to need to create a normal map also. So let's first create the normal map. We'll make a door. We'll leave the name of this door, and that'll be our source. And then to create a target, we'll go ahead and do an edit duplicate or Control D. You'll see a door 1. We can rename that to be door target, just so we know which one the target is. We have over in our layers area of our channel box, we have a target layer and source layer, so I could go ahead and right click with the door target selected, right click the target layer and add selected objects, and with the door I could do the same thing with the source layer. So make sure that you click over that and add selected objects. And before I go in and go ahead and bake this to a normal map, I'm also going to make sure you hide the source layer and select your target layer. And then you're going to right click and assign favorite material blend, so that you just get a plain material on there on the target. And you do that just because you want to be able to see that this target is not doesn't have anything on it. So the original one has actually all the materials on it, the source object, and the target does not. So if I hide the target layer, we can see that the source object does. And if I hide the source object, we can see that the target object doesn't have anything. And it's important because I duplicated these objects, and because I wanted them to have the exact same geometry and UV settings. However, the target has the same material as the source. They're actually sharing a material. It doesn't duplicate the material, it shares the material between those two objects. And if I try to bake one material onto itself, it will actually ruin the material. So you want to avoid creating a loop back to the original material when you do the baking to the normal map. So it's kind of important that you go ahead and right click and assign a new material to this one, not only to see that they're different and to see the results after you bake it, but also so that you don't get any cycle going back to the original material from when you duplicated it. Because when you duplicate things, sometimes there's connections, and the materials can have a connection between them, so they can share the same material. So we've done that, and so we have these two objects, and we can go ahead and switch over to our rendering area, and we'll go up to lighting and shading and open transfer maps. Now we want to render this out. Make sure that you click open both of these areas for target and the source meshes, and make sure that they come in. You can see that I had the target already selected, so it came in automatically, but you could click that again if you want to, if you're not sure. I'll go select the door, which is the source, and I'll add that selected, and I get the door shape under source meshes. So then what I want to do is go ahead and make sure that I have normal map turned on. So we did a diffuse color map before, so if that's turned on, make sure you turn it off. You don't have to remove it because we might use it actually for this one, but I think we'll do the normal map. We'll see what it looks like. And the other map that we made inside of Photoshop for the color map was pretty high res, so we might actually want to bake a color map that's a little bit lower res coming out of Maya. It won't be as high res as the one coming out of Photoshop. But we'll go ahead and do the normal map. You could do them together, but then it's going to take longer, and if it fails, then you'll lose both of them. So I just do them one at a time usually. Make sure you click into your where it's going and choose the bump map or something and change it to normal for the name. So door to normal in this case. And I'll hit save. It's saving as a JPEG. And if we open up Maya Common Output, it's going to render it at 2048 by 2048, which is what we want. So I'll go ahead, and everything looks like it's set up here for this one correctly, and we want to just bake and close. Okay, the door is done, and we can see that it did produce a normal map that if we zoom in, we can see the details of where the lock is and where the rust is, as well as some of these crisscrossed raised areas that we saw on the original door. If we do select the different doors here, we can toggle back between there, or we can just hide them to see what they look like with the color and the normal map. So that's done. We can go look at it, and we can see what the normal map looks like inside of Photoshop. If we open it up, all of those different parts of that door are there, and we can use that inside of Unity. And the color map that we have, we could render it out inside of Maya, or if we want to make it smaller for use inside of Unity, we could just save it again, do another save as, and choose JPEG again. It'll ask you if you want to overwrite it, and then you can go in and you can set some of these down so that you have not quite as large a file for inside of Unity. So set it down. It was 4.5 megabytes. We could put it down to 2 megabytes by bringing the quality down to 10, and that's still going to be a high quality. So before we actually bring it into Unity, let's put some animation on it. So we've already got the maps that we need. We really don't need the target object anymore. So we could go ahead and just delete that target object. And now we just have the door object. And what you could do is we want this door to open on a hinge, and I'm going to put the hinge on the left-hand side so that it opens towards me, or you could make it open away from you, however you want to do it. So I think I'm going to make it so that it opens towards me, and I'll go ahead and go to create to place the animation on a parent object to the door. So I could animate the door directly, but I think I'm going to actually put it on a parent object for the door. So we'll make a hinge. And I'm going to do that by creating an empty, or what's called a locator inside of Maya. They call it an empty inside of Unity. So a locator is just a center, just a transform, and we could place that locator over where we want the hinge to be. So if we know this is a 2-unit wide object, but it comes up in the center, so it's actually -1 would place it exactly at the edge of that door in X. And then we could name that hinge anim. So that's where our hinge animation is going to be. And we can make the door child to that. So if you shift select the door object and go to edit parent, and actually that's the opposite. Select the door first, the parent first, and then select the children first, and then select the parent, which is the hinge anim object, and do the edit parent, or P on your keyboard. And the hinge anim object should be parented over the door. So you got hinge anim, and then door is indented in your outliner when you open up your little plus symbol. So that's going to give you something you can animate at that level, and because this other door object is child to that, it's going to move with whatever the parent does. That's how parenting works inside of all these programs, is that the child always takes the transform values of the parent, and the parent becomes essentially the world axis for the child. So in this case, we place that axis at the left-hand side where your hinge would be. And if I switch, if I hit E or switch to the rotation manipulator and rotate it, I should be able to open that door, swing it from that hinge. So that's what I want to do. I want to create a simple animation with that. So my timeline on the bottom, I need to set it to however long I want this animation to be. If I'm going to do, say, a 3-second opening and then a 3-second close, then, and I'm using 24 frames per second down here, then that means I want to multiply 24 times 3. So that's 72 frames. So 72 is where I want the door to be fully opened. And at 1, I want it to be closed because that's its default state. So you have to do a little bit of math to figure out where your frames are going to fall based on what frames per second you're using, FPS. You can use 30 frames per second. Some people use 60 frames per second, but I think 24 is going to work just fine, and I'll go ahead and use it. It's going to be less frames to deal with. So I'll go ahead and set a keyframe, And I can see that when I rotate this, it's generating numbers in my rotate Y channel over my channel box on the right. So, and it's negative numbers to have it come towards me. So what I'm going to do is on that rotate Y channel, I'm going to right click and key selected, choose key selected with it closed at 0 at frame 1. So the value is 0 in my rotate Y channel, and I see a little red tick mark come up on one of my animation timeline. And that's fine. That's what I want. And then to open it, I'm going to go to frame 72, and I'm going to open the door to however far I think it should be to open. So let's say I want it to open that far, 148 degrees. So if that's where I want it, I can right click and key select it again. And I've moved my timeline to 72 by left clicking it and dragging it. And you can see it creates the animation. So if I play it, it should play the animation. You can right click the timeline. You can check your playback speed and see if it's set to real time. That way you'll get an accurate view of what the animation looks like. And that looks fine to me. So if I need that to go the same amount to close it, then that means I have to change the end frame for my timeline, which is now set to 120, and I'm going to want it to be more like, so 72 plus 72 is 144. So I want at least 144 frames for this animation. So let's go ahead and type that in. Now we have 144 frames. So 72 is going to be opening. Then from 73 to 144 is going to be closing. And I could just type in 0 because I know that's what closed is. You could also go back to the, if for some reason you were doing an animation that didn't start at 0, then you could just copy that frame from the beginning of the animation to the end of the animation. And that you would do just by middle mouse button clicking on the timeline and dragging all the way to the end. You see it doesn't update, and you want to drag it all the way to 144. Well, for some reason, it's not letting me go all the way to 144, so I'm going to just change this to 150 so I have a little more space there. And we'll try it again. So again, middle mouse button dragging doesn't update, so I can actually bring it to 144, let go, and I can, you see the value is 0 again. I can right click and key that selected again. Now I could also hit the S key, but it's going to keyframe all the channels, and I really don't need any animation on this door except for that Y rotation. So I don't need to set keys on all of the different frames. So this looks fine. It's what I wanted. I could set this back to 144 again so that the length of my animation is exactly what my animation on the door is. And then what I want to do is export this out. Now, if you need to do any more adjustments on your animation, I think this looks fine. It sort of opens and then closes. I don't need any pause in the middle because I actually do that through the scripts inside of Unity. And I'll break this animation into pieces when I bring it into Unity. But you might want to look at window animation editors, the graph editor, to see what the curve, the animation curve for this animation looks like. It's the rotate Y channel. We can see that, and we can see that it actually starts flat. If I select all these keyframes here, there's 3 of them. One at the beginning, one in the middle, one at the end, and they're all flat. And what that does is it creates an ease in to the animation and an ease out at the end of the opening, because flat is no movement. So if they're flat, then it's starting from no movement and it's gradually increasing the speed. So the more vertical this curve is, the more speed there is on it. So the more change in values. And so as it gets to the end of that opening, it's actually slowing down because it's flattening out. And then it starts out slow again to close, and then it slows down at the end. And that's a more natural animation for something that actually has physics on it. So normally if something is going from a state of not moving, it actually has to speed up. And so that looks natural. If you needed something more linear, then you could take all of these and you could change them to linear interpolation. Linear tangents at the top here. It looks like a straight line. You can also right click and change the tangents here to different kinds. So currently what we're using is a spline tangent and with flat handles. You can also break tangents so you can move them in opposite directions. Right now, all these tangents, if I grabbed one and moved it, it's going to actually move equally on both sides of the keyframe. And sometimes you don't want that if you're doing a bouncing ball or something like that. So it looks fine the way it is. I'm going to leave it that way, but the animation, the window general editors, animation editors, graph editors, what you would want to use to edit the timing on that if you wanted to change that. Okay, now that we have an animation on this, we want to export it out to Unity to test it out and see what it looks like, and see if we can make it work with our scripts. So before I do that, I'm going to actually go in and I'm going to create a group node parent of this. So another locator or empty that's going to be parented over this. You can do that very easily by just selecting the hinge anim, which is what's actually animating this, and doing a Control G on your keyboard. That's Control G, and it's going to create a new group node that's parented over the hinge anim, and it's basically right in the center of your world space. And you see the hinge anim is child to it, and it's got -1 in its translate X because it's over by the side of the door. And I'm going to name that group node something for the structure that this door would be child to. So ultimately we're going to create other walls and a ceiling and a floor. And so this object is going to replace the outpost object that we're using in our class assets. So I'm going to type in outpost as the name, and I'll just put new and hit enter. And that way we kind of know what this structure is. And the reason I'm doing that is because our scripts actually have the trigger on the outpost object, which is parented over the door, which has the animation. So my animation's on hinge anim, and I want to make sure that I have the same structure so I can put the script on the outpost object, and on the hinge anim I'll actually put the door manager script. So I'm not putting it on the door because the door itself doesn't have any animation. It's the hinge for the door which has the animation. So that's a little bit different than what we're using in the class assets. I set that up slightly different just because it was easier, or it was easy for me to just move or place a empty or a locator right there at the edge of the door to do the animation. And that's frequently what you do when you're doing animation, is create some kind of hierarchical setup to make it easier to animate. So with that there, I'm going to go ahead and export this out, and I want to export just the door parts. So I'm going to go select the Outpost New object, and I'm going to go to select hierarchy so that it selects everything, all the different parts of that small hierarchy that I have for this door. And I want to export it out as an FBX file. So you should have FBX already loaded, but if you find that you don't, make sure you go to Windows, and you're going to go to Settings, Preferences, Plugin Manager, and you can look for FBX. And if you type in FBX, what it should show up as is FBX Maya.mll, and you also have a game FBX exporter, which is what we're going to use as well. And these are plugins, but they automatically load, and just make sure that they're there and that you have them checked so that they're automatically loading. And we'll go to File, and we're going to send to Unity selection. And I'm doing selection because I don't want to send all my lights and cameras and everything over, just like I mentioned before. We just want to send this one object over. And if you've done this before, it should already be set to go into your Unity project, into the assets folder of your Unity project. And you can choose where you want to put it. I'm going to put it in my Models folder. Look at the previous video if this is not going to the right place, because you might have to set your Unity project. But mine's going correctly where I want it to go, and I want to give it a name. In this case, I'll just call it Door Anim, and it's going to go into my Models folder of my project. Now, before you go ahead and export it, check your export settings. Make sure that you've got animation turned on. You've got smooth mesh. I have deform models, skins, and blend shapes, but I'm not really using that, so it's going to ignore it. Same thing around for skeleton definitions. Embed media is on, and I'm using automatic scale factor, which is actually going to bring it in really small to Unity. You're going to want to increase the size by 100 times. You could do some tests and figure out exactly what you want to export as to make it come in at a better size inside of Unity. But I just usually do that on the import settings inside of Unity. So I know it's going to come out really, really small. I'm going to go ahead and export selection. And that will send all of that over to my Unity project file. And I can go into there and check it. So I saw it get imported, and I'm going to go ahead and go to the My Models folder and look for that Door Anim object. And here's where I would see the import settings. So on the right in my inspector, this is where I see the import settings. And if I go to Model, that's where the scale factor is what's going to be really, really small. So we did this with the cube. I'm going to go ahead and increase it to 100 so that we can see the door. And that might be too big. You might want to put it down to like 80 or something like that once you see it. you'll look and see how big your FPS controller is compared to your door, and you want to scale it accordingly. Because your FPS controller is supposed to be like a 5-6 foot person. So if you're really small compared to the door, you're going to want to make this a smaller scale factor. But go ahead and set it in there and apply it. And then go to Rig, and we're going to use Legacy. So Legacy is for animation that is using the older animation component. And it's actually the fastest way to check your animation that you're importing into Unity. The newer one, the current one, is generic, and that's going to actually create an animator node, animator component on your object. But I'm going to use Legacy because I want to check it, and it's going to be really fast for me to check it. And also because the scripts that we're using actually use the older Legacy method. So they're going to work immediately with the Legacy method, and we'll have to change them to use the newer generic animator method. So I'm going to use Legacy to start with, and I'll apply it. And then I'll go to Animation. And whether you're using Legacy or generic, you're going to have to adjust some things on this animation tab. But you want to set the rig first. I also want to go to Materials and change from Embedded Materials to External Materials, and change Recursive up to Local Materials folder and apply it. And the reason you want to do that is because otherwise you can't adjust your texture maps. So I want to be able to adjust my texture maps. I'm going to add the normal map to it and all of that. So let's go ahead and drag it into our scene, and then we'll go adjust the animation tab here and update it after we do that. So I'm going to pull it in, and I want to just kind of place it in there. And I see that my textures are not coming in. So I'm going to need to go ahead and open up that object and find the actual door, and I want to bring my textures over and put them into my My Textures folder that I have right here. So I'll go ahead and do that now. My textures, I baked my normal map to my source images folder in my Maya project. I'm going to go ahead and shift select the color map and the normal map called Door2 Color and Door2 Normal. I'm going to copy those, right click them and copy them. And then I'm going to go and paste them into the My Textures folder. So I'm right clicking and pasting into that My Textures folder. So that way Unity will automatically import them, and I can then select them to check their import settings. And you see that my door updated. It automatically found them and placed them on there. At least it placed the color map. I don't think it placed the normal map yet. So I'm going to go and check that color map. It should be default 2D. The only thing I might want to change on the color map is the ISO level. I might want to pull that up because that's a quality setting, and I want to check the max size is 2048 because that's what I used inside of Photoshop and inside of Maya when I baked my textures. So I'm going to apply that, and then I'll go over to the normal map, and this one needs to be set to normal map. If you don't, you're going to get a little error saying you're trying to use a normal map and it's not set to normal map. And it'll ask you, and you can apply it then, but you might as well go ahead and check it and do it on your own so you don't get that little error message. So I'm setting this to normal map, and I'm going to set the ISO level to the same thing I did for the color map. I'm going to check the max size again and make sure it's 2048. And that should be ready to go then. I can go back to my material on my door and open it up. And I can check and see if it plugged in the maps. And it actually did. It plugged in my normal map and my albedo with the color map. And it looks pretty good. So if I want to check it, I can just go ahead and hit play, and we'll walk up to it. Let's put maximize on play on my window, and we'll walk up to it and take a look at it. Now you can see that it's animating, and we can see that there is some bumpiness on it. Now, you might have noticed that I have a light on my FPS controller because I changed my scene here to be a little darker, and I wanted to be able to see things better. So I actually went in and created a spotlight called headlight under your create menu. I just went to light and chose spotlight. And then I parented underneath the first person character, which is where my camera is on my FPS controller. So that's what I actually look around with. And that way the light will look around with my head if I parent it under there. And you just do that by dragging it on to the first person character node. And then you can set your color and your spot angle and everything, and set your intensity and your range so that you actually can see that a little bit as you walk around. And if you're in a dark environment, that can be nice to see what's going on. So everything looks okay on that door, and you saw it was animating automatically. I'm going to go back and look at the top door anim empty here, which is just a transform, but it's got an animation component. And this animation component was created when you chose legacy in the import settings. So that created this node, and it creates it at the very top of the hierarchy, what's called the root node. And you can see that it's got a size of 1 for the animation, and take 1 is the animation that came in from Maya, and it's playing it automatically. And that's why this method is actually the easiest way to just sort of see whether your animation is working or not, because it's playing automatically. And you can see it's opening away from me, so it's actually turned around 180 degrees. So I might want to go ahead and select the top node there, the door anim node, and just rotate it in Y 180 so that it's going to actually animate towards me instead of away from me. So now it's opening towards me. And you can see it's kind of intersecting with the ground. It's not on a really flat place there. And if I walk up to it, it doesn't have the door itself, if I check it, doesn't have any collider on it. So that's a bit of a problem because I could walk right through this door. So you might want to take the door itself and go ahead and add a component and physics, and add a box collider that will sit. It'll scale exactly to the size of that door, and that way I can't walk through the door. Also, you might want to tell it that sometimes when you have animation on something like this, you want the physics engine to track it because it does have a collider, but you don't want it to actually use gravity or anything like that. It's just animating. So you can add physics rigid body to it. And I don't want you to get confused because we've added rigid body for stuff that we want to actually use gravity. but we don't want to use gravity here, but we do want to turn on is kinematic. And what that does is it just tracks that object with the physics engine, so that things like collision detection, which you can see actually there's a section in there for collision detection, you might want to adjust this to something like if you find that you're shooting something at it and the projectiles are going right through it, it may actually need to be, this might need to be changed to like continuous collision detection, which will actually fire more often to, if something's moving really fast, it might actually go through the collider because it's kind of moving through it at the in between one of the game loops, and so it doesn't actually catch it and do the collision. But there's ways of forcing it to sort of update faster, and one of these might actually make it so that it doesn't go through the door. So it's kind of a good thing if you have something animated and has a collider on it to go ahead and add a rigid body, but don't use gravity and turn on is kinematic, so that the physics engine can track it. So now if I actually walk up to that, if I try to walk through that door, it stops me. I'll run into it and it'll just stop me. Okay, so so that's working, and I can see the animation's working, but I actually want to control this animation and open the door when I walk up to it. So I have some scripts to do that, but I need to set up the animation on the original object that I brought in, the one that's a prefab in my My Models folder. So I want to go over and find that and go to the Animations tab, and I need to create the opening and closing animation because I've got an animation here, take one, that has the whole thing in it. And I don't, if you're testing it, you might want to put that, you might want to switch the wrap mode to loop so it just continuously loops. If I apply that, and if I want to see the animation and make sure it looks okay, I might want it to loop so it keeps going. And then but I don't actually want that to play automatically once I do the testing. So I can go to the door anim and I can turn off play automatically after I've tested it. And now it's not going to play at all. It's just going to sit there. So what I want to do is I want to go back to the door itself on the import settings in animation, and I want to create segment off the open animation and the close animation. So I'm going to do that by hitting this little plus symbol here, which will add a new clip, and I'm going to make that clip go from 1 to 72. That's half my animation. So my animation is 144 frames. 72 is halfway. That is the opening animation, and I can call it door open. And I'm going to just do all lowercase, no spaces, just like we're using in our current scripts, so that I can just apply those scripts to this and it will automatically find that door because I'm using the correct name. And then I'm going to hit plus again, and I'm going to name it door shut, and go over and make that animation go from 73 to 144, and that's the closing animation. I'm not going to bother making an idle. If I was going to make an idle, it would be, and I will actually make an idle when we're using the animator, But for the legacy one, I don't really need an idle because I'm not playing it automatically. And so it's just going to be sitting there, and the only time it's going to open is when I call the open animation and when I play the shut animation. So take one is never going to play, and it's sitting without any animation playing when it's closed. So I don't actually need an idle in this case. So I'm going to just leave that off of it and hit apply. And then once I do that, you might also want to change your wrap mode to just once for each one of these open and shut animations. So door open I set to once, same thing for door shut, and I'll apply that as well. And the reason you want that is because when I open and close it, I'm not going to loop it. I just want it to happen once. And so that's the wrap mode. And if I go back to the actual door that's in my scene, I can see now that it has a size of 3 as the animation array, and that the 0, 1 is still take 1, and the element 1 is door open, element 2 is door shut. And those are the two that I'm going to use. Take 1 I'm never going to use. So play automatically is off. It's just going to stay the way it is until I open it from the script. So to open it from the script, it's the same way that I did it with the other outpost object that we're using in our class assets from the textbook. So if I want to set it up the same way, I would put the trigger on the top node on the door anim empty. So here's where I would add a component and a physics component and a box collider. And I would scale it and move it using my different center and size settings. So let's just go ahead and do that. I'm going to scale it first in Y and make it about the size of the door, maybe a little bigger than the door. And then I want to scale it in X. Again, I'll make it a little bigger, and then I'll scale it in Z so it kind of sticks out a little bit. So I want to get to it. The door is going to be opening towards me, so I don't want to run into it. I'll make it bigger so that I can actually hit this well before it actually opens. So that's my trigger, and I want to turn on is trigger on that box collider to make sure that it's going to be a trigger, and I can walk right through that green volume that I have inside of my 3D view. So now let's go and add the scripts, because we have our hinge animation, and we have the animation on the top node with the trigger. And so to trigger it, we need to add component scripts, and I'm just going to add the trigger zone start script. So we're using the trigger zone script in class, which has a lot more in it. The trigger zone start script is really just for opening the door. We can put the trigger zone one on there later, but I'm going to go ahead and just use the simple one for right now, the trigger zone start. Doesn't have any arguments or anything, no public variables. So that's on there. I do want to look at that, so I'm going to go to my scripts folder and take a look at it. So we'll look at my scripts, and we want to go into our project scripts, and here's trigger zone start. So I'll just right click it and open it in Visual Studio. And so this trigger zone start script, it doesn't have much in it. We have trigger zone start as the name. Of course, your class name has to be the same as your script name. And we're using all the standard system collections and Unity Engine at the top. We don't actually have any variables at the beginning of this script. And I've annotated the script to say that this one is going to go, this is for testing a door, and it's going to go on your outpost object. And so we're putting it on our outpost new, and it has nothing in the start, nothing in the update. All it has is a trigger procedure that is going to look at the trigger that's on this empty, that has this script, and it's going to find out when something collides into that trigger, and if what collided into it is tagged player, then it's going to run this transform command to find hinge anim and send a message to it for door check. So in this case, this is very similar to what we were using on the previous class assets. The only thing I've changed here is the name of the object that it's looking for. So it's looking for something called hinge anim because that's what I named this in here. And you know, I actually am spelling it wrong in the script there. So I can see that I've actually spelled this one with a capital H. So it's not going to find it. If I want to, I could change the one in the script, or I could change this here, but they have to be the same. I'll go ahead and change this one here to a lowercase h. Actually, yeah, it doesn't matter. Let's leave this the way it is, since I've got this sort of capitalization going on my names of my objects where they have a capital at the beginning. I'll go ahead and change that in the script by going back to the script and making a capital H here. We'll do a file save on that, and it's green, so that means everything's fine. So the way this is working, as we've done in class, and this is showing another application of it, so hopefully you are understanding how this is working. If I go to my FPS controller, I can see that we've tagged this player, and it's one of the built-in tags. And that's important because this trigger is not going to work if the thing that collides into it is not tagged player. You don't have to make this player tag, it's already there. You just have to make sure it's turned on your FPS controller. And then it's going to look for something called hinge anim, and it's sending a message to it to run door check. Well, door check is in a different script that we have called door manager. So if I open up door manager, we look inside of it, we can see actually there is a door check procedure, and this is what's going to open the door and play the door open animation that I just created on the door object, or actually on the hinge object. So wherever you put this, we put it on the door on our previous outpost, but on this new outpost object, we're actually placing it on the hinge. But it doesn't matter as long as it's going to find it has the correct animation names that are on the top node. So I'll go through this script again in a second. Let's just go and place this onto the hinge. So this top node, I called it door anim, but we could change the name here to outpost new, because this is really representing the outpost from what we had previously on the class assets. So this is a new, this would be the new outpost once I get the rest of the models in here. And the hinge anim is the door, so it actually would have the Scripps door manager on it. And if we want it to work correctly with these sounds that it's going to put in here, we also have to add an audio source because it's looking for some sounds for the opening and closing of the door. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my sounds folder. And actually I have some new sounds because the older sounds were for a door that slides open, and I made some new sounds for a door that sort of opens towards you and kind of creaks. And it's a longer sound because this takes longer for this door to open. So I went over to freesound.org and downloaded some sounds. So there are websites out there where you can get sounds, and freesound.org is one of them, and you just have to credit these people that created the sounds, credit freesound.org and whoever created it in your game credits, but you're free to use these, and you can just search for sounds. So I just searched for like a door creak, something like that, and you find all kinds of things that say door squeak, and they're usually WAV files. You have to create an account, but once you do, you can log in and you can just go into it and download a sound. Usually they're waves or MP3s. So you download those, and you can then edit them in something like Audacity, or just bring them straight in if they work without any editing. And I put some in my sounds folder, and I could go in and find them here and place them in there. So here I have a door open and a door shut for this door, which is different than the other doors. So we'll plug them in. I have a door open new and a door shut new. And so I've got the audio source there. It's not going to need to play on awake, so I could turn that off. And with the door manager script on there and the trigger on the top outpost node and the trigger zone script on there, it should work now. So let's try it. Actually, we'll go ahead and hit play, and we'll walk up to it. And you can see that it did open and close. So that's working. I'll just turn my audio up a little bit on that. So one thing that with this new door is I want it to stay open longer because it actually takes longer to open than the other door. The other door opens in about a second, but this door takes 3 seconds to open because it's 72 frames at 24 frames per second. That's what I animated inside of Maya. So the setup in the door manager has a door open time, and I've probably right now by default it's set to 3, which is actually hardly, that's just the time it takes to open all the way. So if I actually wanted to sit open for a little bit so I can actually walk through it, then I might want to put a higher number in this, like 6, so that when I hit play and I walk up and hit that trigger, it stays open long enough for me to be able to walk through, and then it closes again. So, and we could test it from this side too. Stays open, I can walk through it. Okay, so everything's working on the door with the legacy animation. If I go to the door manager script, I'll just go over it one more time really quick. It's got a Boolean variable for door is open set to false, which means the door is closed by default. And then we've got a timer that is counting off once the door opens, and it stays open for a certain amount of time. So there's a float variable being declared here to set the numbers for the timer, and then there's a door open time, and it's a public float. So that means it's going to show up in the inspector, and that's what I was able to change to 6 seconds. Here you can see it's set to 3 by default, but I can manually set it to 6 inside of the inspector, and it will remember that. And then you have a couple of public variables that are audio clip types, which means it's going to be looking for a sound to be plugged in, and I plugged in my creaky door sound for opening and closing the door. In start, it sets the beginning of your door timer to start at 0. So whenever the door opens, that timer is going to start at 0. In update, you actually have the timer. So what's going to happen in update is continuously running with the game loop. So it's always checking to see if the door becomes open. By default, it's false, it's closed. And then when it opens, and it opens from the door check procedure. So when the outpost object and the other script that's on the outpost object, the trigger zone start script, sends a message for door check to this script, it runs an if statement that checks to see that the door is not open. So the exclamation point in front of door is open actually means not. So not door is open means that door is open is false. So it's evaluating, an if statement is always evaluating the truth of this statement that's in the parentheses. And if you put just door is open and it's set to false by default, then it's actually going to be not true, and it actually won't run anything in this procedure. But if you put not on there, it's actually going to look for it to be false, and that will be true in this if statement. And therefore, you don't want to open the door if it's already open. So you want to make sure it's closed, and this is checking to see, is it closed? And if that's true, then it's going to run the door procedure, which inputs 3 arguments, one for the sound, one for whether the door is open or not, and then one for the animation that you're going to play. And this is the door open animation. It's exactly spelled the same way that I spelled it when I created it inside of the animation components. And then here's the door procedure itself. And this is where you set up the 3 arguments and their types. And so it's looking for an audio clip. It's looking for a true or false Boolean. And then it's looking for a string of some kind, which is usually, it's anything within double quotes, any characters within double quotes, but it's usually a name. And in this case, it's the animation name. And then it's saying, okay, set door is open to open check. That's the first thing it does. And open check is whatever's coming in the second argument. And for this one, if you're opening it, it's true. So true is coming in. And it's setting door is open to true. And then it's getting a component for the audio source on this object that the script is on, and it's doing a play one shot, which means play the sound once. And then it's doing a transform command .parent .get component animation. So it's going and finding the animation component that is one parent up in the hierarchy. So it's looking for the immediate parent of whatever this script is on to find the animation component. And when it finds it, it's going to play whatever is the name of the animation coming in. In this case, it's door open. So that's important because that's why we created a parent group node to the hinge animation, so that the animation when it comes in will actually go one parent up. So we didn't have to change this line of the script. We could change it, but it makes it a little easier if we don't have to. And then up here under update, once the door opens, it's always checking to see if door is open is true. And if that's true, and it is true because it's set down here as the first line in this door animation, then it's going to start the timer, and it's adding time.delta time, which is the game loop. It's just the game time, and it's making door timer plus equals to that, so it keeps adding it to it. And if that door timer becomes greater than door open time, which we set to 3 seconds, and then manually set it to 6 seconds, if that door timer becomes greater than that, then it's going to run the door procedure again with the shut door parameters going into it. So door shut sound, false for the door being open, and the door shut animation is going to play. And then it resets the door timer back to 0 for the next time the door is open. So that's how this script is working. It's exactly the same script that we've looked at before. I just wanted to review it again. And it's being called from the other script on the outpost object, trigger zone start. Okay, so all of that's working. Now, if you want to use the newer animation system, you have to set it up a little differently. You're going to use an animator, and you're going to use an animator controller. It's more involved, and we can look at that also so that you can kind of know both ways. Let's use the same door to create the newer animator components. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the hinge anim, and we're not going to use the door manager script. So if you want to, go ahead and save as some version of this. If you do this version with the legacy animation, you could save it as door anim legacy. So you have that. And then what I want to do is I'm going to remove the, click on the cog icon and remove the component for the door manager script, because I'm not going to use that door manager script. And I'll go to where the outpost is. I'm going to continue using these three, the door open and door shut animation, so I'm not going to change those. But I do want to add an idle, and I need to actually remove this animation component. So on the outpost object, I can leave the trigger zone script, but I'm going to take the animation component off. So I'm going to, again, click on the cog icon next to animation, and I'm going to remove that component. So the animation component is not there anymore. And I'm going to go back over to my models folder and find the door that we brought in. So here's the door that we imported. And I'm going to go to the rig section, and we're going to switch from legacy to generic. And I'll just leave all the other ones at the default settings, all the other sections here, create from this model, none, standard. I'm just going to leave those at their defaults and apply it. So if I go to animation, I'm still going to have the door open and door shut, but I want to add one more. So I'm going to hit the plus symbol one more time, and I'm going to name it idle. I'll just do all lowercase like I did with the other ones, idle. And I'm just going to pull this back, the end tick mark for the animation. I'm going to pull it all the way over so that it starts at 1 and ends at 1. So it's a 1-frame animation. It's not really doing anything in its closed position. And I'll go ahead and apply that. And that animation actually, since there is no animation, it's not really giving me options for certain things. Actually, some of the things that were there in the legacy are they're just not there. If you want to loop something, you would put loop time on. And so the idle, I would want to loop. So I'm going to turn loop time on for the idle, but for the door open and door shut, don't turn it on because you only want those to play once. But the idle, I do want to loop, even though it's not really doing much of anything. And I'll apply it. So I have those 3. Take one, I'm not going to use it all, so that's fine. Now, when you do these, you no longer have an animation node, but once you set it to generic and hit apply, if you go back to your outpost again, you'll find that you actually have an animator node now. So you don't want an animation and an animator node. They can't both be on there, or they just won't work. So it's one or the other. It's either the old legacy method or the new animator method, but not both. And so I removed the animation component, and when I set it to generic, it created this animator component. And it also created what's called an avatar that it automatically plugged in. And all of that stuff is actually underneath the door. If you open up this little, in your models folder where you imported the door, it has a little arrow on it, and if you click it, it opens up the whole hierarchy of things within that import object, and one of them is a thing that looks like a wooden dummy, and that's actually an avatar. You're not really using the avatar for this because there's no humanoid type of animation on it, but it's there and it just plugs it in. But what's important is that it's created these animation nodes that have little play buttons on them. Those are each animation nodes. And so those actually are what was created when you set the animation and you applied it in the animation tab for the door object. So when you created these clips, that's what it created. And you need to know that because you're going to plug those in to an animator controller. So when you're using this newer method, when you go to the Outpost object and you look at the animator component, you'll see that there's a controller section that's empty and says none. And you actually have to create an animator controller and plug it in and set that animation controller. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So under your Create menu in your project, about halfway down, there's an animator controller, and you can create one there. And then you can name this one like Door Controller. Something like that. And hit Enter. So now I have a door controller that I can plug in to the section on the Outpost that says None. So I can just drag that over onto it. And now it's got a animator controller. Now there's nothing in that animator controller, so it won't do anything yet. So I have to go select the animator controller and open it. And it opens in your 3D view, and it looks like this. It's a node-based animation system, and when you first open it, there's nothing there but a green and a blue node that really you don't do anything with those. So what we need to do actually is create some nodes. So you right click in the empty area and you create a state, and I'm going to create an empty state. And it's the first state. This is the default state for this animator controller. And so you can see it goes from the entry node into this new state. And I'll call this new state idle. I could use the same sort of casing, or I'm just going to capitalize it idle. So this is my idle state. And the idle state is the default state of this door. And so that's just one frame closed. And a speed of 1 means it's going to play forward at a normal speed. And in my case, I just want to plug in the animation that I called idle. So that's going to be underneath my model, and it looks like these ones that have little play buttons on them. And there's one called idle that I created. And I'm going to drag it over and drop it where it says motion. You could also click the little circle next to it and pick it, but there might be more than one and you might not be able to tell which one is which. So you might want to just find the one you want and drag it in there. So now I've got idle plugged in for the door that I created, and that's the default. And then you want to right click the empty area again, create another state, another empty state, and this one I'm going to call open, or open door. So we know what it is. And that open door state is going to have the door open animation plugged into where it says motion. And I want the idle to transition to the open door. So the closed door, the only place it can go is the open door. So you right click the idle and choose make a transition, and it makes this little arrow that you can then drop on the node that you want to go to. And I want to go to the open door node here. So I've got the entry, then I've got idle, and it goes to open door. And this any state is not really going to be used. So door open animation is going to play, and the speed of 1 just means it plays forward. And that's I'm gonna trigger that later, but I'm just gonna do it as sort of it's gonna happen automatically. Let's just click it again and create another empty state. I'm gonna call it door shut, and I'm gonna put the door shut, or actually, if I'm being consistent, let's call this one shut door. And I'll put the door shut animation into it. And again, it's going to play forward, so a speed of 1. And I right click, make a transition, and go from open door to shut door, because that's really the only place it can go. I mean, I could go back to idle, but I have a door shut door animation. I might as well go to it. And then the shut door is going to go back to idle again. So I'm going to right click that and make a transition and go back to idle. So I made a loop here from idle to open door to shut door back to idle. So those animations are plugged in, and right now they're just going to play automatically because there's nothing to keep them. It's just going to start with the idle. It's going to go to open door, then it's going to go to shut door, and then it'll go back to idle. Let's just try that and see if it works. So if I hit play, I should just see the door open and close. And it's going to loop because that's what the nodes are doing. They're looping. So what I want is I want to control this so that I call these different states. And so you have to create a parameter on the left here of the animator where it says parameters. There's a little plus symbol, and you just click on that, and you can choose a type of parameter that you want to create. Well, I want to create I'm going to do an integer parameter. Now, floats are decimals, integers are whole numbers, booleans are true or false. And then trigger is a little different. So I'm just going to use an integer where a number will represent each state. So I'm going to choose integer. I'm going to give it a name. I'll call it door state, capital D and capital S. And so I've created this integer variable called door state. And the states are going to be idle is 0, open door is 1, and shut door is 2. So whenever the door state goes to those, I want those different nodes to be activated. So I'm going to go over and click on the transitions. So these are, you can click on the little arrows going between the states, and this is the transition between those two states. Has exit time means that it's going to complete the entire animation before it goes to the next one. And then I want to have a condition on the bottom, so I'm going to click plus for the one going between idle and open door. And when I click on plus, it gives me the only parameter I have, which is door state. And I want to, if door state goes to 1, so I'm going to put 1, and I'm going to put equals 2. So you have a greater, less, equals, or not equals. I'm going to say if door state equals 1, then do that transition from idle to open door. So that's my condition that I'm setting for this transition between these two states. And then I'll go to the next one that goes between open door and shut door, and I'll go ahead and say that I want to add a condition. Door state is going to equal to 2. So if door state equals 2, it's going to go from open door to shut door. And then once the door is shut, I want it to just automatically go back to idle and start over again. So I'm not going to put any condition on this transition from shut door to idle. That way, when shut door runs and finishes, it's just going to automatically go back to idle. So the only time it's going to go to open door if the door state goes to equals 1, and the only time it's going to go to shut door is the door state equals 2. That's my setup for the animator controller. And it won't open anymore because if I hit play, it's just going to sit in idle now. It's not going to open because door state is not 1. If I type in 1 for the door state up in the left here and hit play, it will open, but it won't close. If I type in 2 and hit enter and hit play, well, that doesn't really work because it starts in a closed state. So that's actually going from open to close, but it's already in a closed state. So you're not going to see it. So I'm going to put this back to 0, which is the idle position to start at. And then what I want to do is I'm going to switch back. I'm going to go back up to Window, Layouts, 2x3, and we'll double click my FPS controller to get back to where I was. So we're looking at our door. And what I want to do here is I've created a script that modifies the door manager script to have these to work with the animator and these states. So if I go look at my scripts folder, custom scripts, I created a door animator script. So I went to create C# script and named it door animator. And let's open that up and take a look at it. Okay, so here's the door animator script. I just copied everything from the door manager into this door animator script. So most of it's exactly the same as the door manager. The only thing that's different is I had to go in and change the lines to use the animator instead of animation. So now it's getting component for the animator instead of animation and putting it in a door anim variable. So this variable wasn't in the door manager script. It's a new one, animator door anim. And that's creating a variable that will contain an animator. And then here inside of start, I'm actually finding that animator on the parent node of the object that this script is on and putting it into the door anim variable. And then down here in the door procedure is where I'm using that door anim variable to set integer for the animation name and the anim state. So anim name is actually it's coming up here. It's a string, and it's the door state. It's the state name, and then the anim state is an integer, and it's actually which state you want to play. So inside of the animator, we created that door state parameter, and then we set different ones to mean open door and closed door. 0 was idle, 1 was open door, 2 was closed door. So if I want to open the door in door check, I'm running the door procedure, and it's an extra argument going in because we only had 3 arguments going in before. We had these 3 with this up to the string name, but now we have a state that we also have to put in there. So then now there's 4 arguments going into the door procedure, and the last one, 1, means open door. And then up here in the update, we're shutting the door, so we're running it again, but we're using state 2, and that's for shutting the door. So that's how this script was modified to make it work with the animator that I just set up in the animator controller. So I want to put this in the same place that I had the other one, the door manager. So I'll go open up my outpost new, and I want to place this on the hinge anim, and I'm going to add component scripts, and we'll choose door animator. And it's very similar to the door manager. I need my 2 audio clips, so let's go ahead and find my sounds folder and place those in. Door open new, door shut new, and that should be all I need. Everything else is the same. What's calling the door animator script is the same. It's all working the same except for changing those lines in the door manager. So if I hit play, okay, so I'll walk up to the door. You can see it opens, and we see it closes. So that's what you want to see. Let's walk through, turn around, and we see it close. So the basic functionality of the door is working now, and it's working with the new animator controller that is running through different states to open and close the door. So now you have 2 ways that you could do your animation. You could do it through the original animation method inside of Unity, which was the legacy animation, or it's called legacy now, and use the script that I already provided, or you can do the animator method, which is the newer method, which I think you should learn because we're going to be using that more, especially as we get to character animation. So that method is going to require some states, and you can download the new script from Canvas that shows those lines that you have to change in that script to make it access the animator. Okay, in the next video, I'm going to show how to go back into modeling a little bit more and show how you can create the wall, which is going to be the rest of the front part of this new outpost, and then I'll do a ceiling and the other walls and a floor as well. So start working on this to create some custom models with animation that you can bring in and make work with your scripts.